Everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. In this one, we'll be talking about a Mega 4090/Ti card. We'll also be going over EVGA, probably winding down at this point, some massive Intel Arc GPU improvements. Once again, Intel continues to ship these large driver updates, and the newest one includes fixes past 300% performance improvement for specifically Assassin's Creed Unity, which is probably the one person at Intel on the Arc team who's like, I really want to play this game, I'm gonna fix it myself. And finally, we'll be talking about the GPD Win 4 giving the ASUS Ally and the Steam Deck some competition, along with some other stories. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and the CryoSheet graphene pads. These CryoSheets are molecularly stacked in the Z-axis to encourage vertical direct thermal transfer from the IHS to the cooler. CryoSheet pads are made to be easily applicable for a thermal interface and completely avoid paste dryout because it's not paste. It makes them particularly useful for long service life systems with minimal maintenance. They come in multiple sizes for suitability on the most common laptops and desktop CPUs, and you can learn more at the Thermal Grizzly CryoSheets at the link in the description below. A quick GN store update before getting into the news. So for anyone who purchased the Amp Modmat previously, that's the red and black, medium-sized one, we found an error that we didn't catch before getting into production. The error involves a mix-up of the text labeling as it relates to one of the pinout diagrams. This doesn't affect the functionality of the mat, so its physical functionality as an anti-static conductive surface is unchanged. However, it was a really stupid mistake and oversight that I take ownership of here, and we wanted to go over the top with correcting it for you. But as for how it happened, basically, during the design process, our design team makes a lot of changes as we move stuff around and try different things out for the design as we try to see what works. So the pinout diagram was correct, and somewhere during the design process, we swapped part of the diagram itself, like the drawing, without moving the text or moving the wrong text or something like that while moving stuff around. Now, at this point in the design, I had already approved everything and checked it, and I didn't check it again after the final couple of swaps we did, so that's my mistake. So it slipped through and I should have caught it, but we learned from this and we have additional QC steps at the end of the pipeline now. However, I still wanted to resolve this issue fully and go as above and beyond as we can, because we always say that everyone will face a manufacturing issue at some point, and it's about how you resolve it that counts. So it's what we push computer hardware manufacturers for, and I wanted to live by that too, and not just push others for it. So we'll go over what our steps were, and then this really cool resolution that we have. Once we noticed this problem, we immediately set the medium Modmats to out of stock, meaning I took the inventory away from the website. We were still sitting on a ton of inventory, so it was basically a lot of money tied up that can't move, but that's fine, because to me it was more important to fix the issue, figure it out, and then we could worry about it after the fact. So step one was to set them out of stock. Step two was to figure out the best solution to fix the misprint. And so I personally set out with testing a lot of different paint removal and replacement methods. After trying many different things, we realized we can't change the paint after manufacturing in any feasible way. And so we kept the item unavailable during this entire testing process, and we set forth with developing a set of pinout cards with a UV coating for a nice reflectivity on a suede card and containing not only the corrected EPS 12-volt pinout labeling and diagram, but also additional pinouts not on the original mat. Further, we wanted to do something extra beyond the printed fix, and we additionally developed some 3D models, molds, and die casting solutions for a bonus PCIe pin to go with the corrected EPS 12-volt thick cardstock diagrams. So this tied up a lot of time and money for us, but we really wanted to make something cool to send to people as a fix, and we decided to make these free limited edition metal pins and these two cards with the correct information. These don't have a cost. Anyone who has already purchased the Amp Modmat has received an email already where you can get a kit that will include free shipping as well. And if you don't want it anymore, we can also arrange a return for the Modmat. So check your inbox for that. For anyone who's going to purchase the remainder of this manufacturing batch, the special pin, which is a PCIe 8-pin, and the 2 pinout cards that we made will also be included because we can't undo the misprint. And as mentioned, the mat itself is fine, and this also only affects the Amp Media Modmat, no others. And to shift focus to the fix itself for a second and talk about that, this actually was pretty complicated to get done. It took a few months to do, and that's because we had to make tooling. We invested some real money in developing this die-cast, nickel-plated PCIe 8-pin connector. It has multiple depth levels and multiple colors between the gold coloring, the black, and the plated metal, and this actually made it really difficult to manufacture. The 2 cards that are also included have a punched hole to make them easy to hang up at your workbench or on your pegboard. We used a thick suede cardstock, and part of this design is actually spot UV treated to get it reflective and shiny as an accent. We also printed 2 separate cards for pinouts, one of them including 12-volt high power, which I think at the time we designed the amp wasn't even a public thing yet. So that's new and extra. And if you bought one already, again, check your email to get these. If you want them, you can buy the Amp Media Modmat. We just put them back on the store available, and these high quality items will be included as the fix for the misprint. We're not gonna make any more of these. This is only as we get through the batch with the print error on it. So when I was saying over the top earlier, hopefully that resonates because we really put some serious money into fixing this problem. It was a good learning experience too for a lot of things. One of them on the manufacturing side. And my number one objective was to fix it properly and not worry about the cost, just get it done. We've regularly praised companies like Noctua or Fractal for customer support, for resolutions of problems, and this was a test for us, I think, to practice what we preach. While we're on this topic, we had a few emails come in that mentioned that some customers who had a few specific shirts with specific designs experienced fading. We've tested dozens of shirts at this point. We haven't noticed many issues. However, we did find that a few designs from specific production runs were below our endurance standards. So if you were affected by this, we'd like to replace those shirts for you. Basically, if you experienced fading within the first month or so, meaning fading beyond what you would expect of a shirt, then reach out to us and we'll go ahead and start a replacement and a swap for you. If you saw that fading issue within the first month, just email us. You can email us at support@gamersnexus.net and we'll get the swap started for you. And if you have any issues in general just with the store, always feel free to hit up that email and the support team will be happy to assist. And of course, all shirts will obviously experience some fading over time, but it shouldn't be after a few washes. That's not acceptable, and we want you to know that we think it's not acceptable, so you just ping us. Anyway, our quality standards have been high for content, carries over to products as well, and when we make mistakes in videos, we have corrections that we do. We have a whole process that's publicly defined for how we handle those corrections, and I'm pretty happy with how we handle them for videos. We're transplanting that same ethos to the store and applying it to the store as well. And again, view this as a test to show you that we're serious and that I'll put my money where my mouth is when it comes to supporting our audience and our customers who are supporting us, because we recognize that. So hopefully you all are happy with the pin as the solution. And if you want to get one and you didn't buy a mat originally, then it's back on the store now and available on store.gamersnexus.net. Okay, next topic. The enormous NVIDIA FE cooler belonging to a presumed future Titan or 4090 Ti has surfaced again for another sighting, like some kind of rare whale. We previously reported on this back in January when photos of a stripped down cooler and one shot of the I/O portion of an assembled card came to light.
Notice the beautiful lights. So many different lights, and all of the different lights are projecting light.
Expert Vala posted 2 previously unseen pictures of the 4-slot behemoth to Twitter. The first is a side-by-side with an RTX 3080, giving perspective to just how wide the mystery cooler is. It also gives us a good view of the comically small-looking single 12-volt high-power connector on the side. One version of the rumor of this card quoted 2 power connectors, so that's looking false at this point, or at least referenced a different version than we see here. The second photo shows the cooler from the same angle as the January leak, but this time it doesn't have a PCB attached and there aren't any markings on the I/O plate. That could mean this specific sample is from earlier in the development process than the complete card we saw in January. And the same original source had additional photos, but they were pulled from the internet by the time we got to filming this. WCCF Tech, however, managed to capture them. We looked around, we couldn't find the real original source of the images watermarked with Hayaka, but here they are. First is this one with the cooler being held up and showing the backside. It doesn't show much new versus the previous leaks, except for the fan being installed in this example. Note again how this cooler doesn't have a backplate and instead is flow-through across basically the entire card. You can even make out a few of the heat pipes in the small triangle of space to the left of the center of this image. If you missed the last story on this thing and are wondering where the actual PCB goes, it's made to mount to the side that faces the motherboard, where the person's hand is, rotated 90 degrees from the usual orientation. The next photo shows the cooler from the underside, revealing the cold plate with contact areas for the GPU die, memory, and VRM components. Compared with older leaks, this more assembled cooler gives you a clearer picture of where the components sit in relation to the card as a whole. Also visible are the ZIF ribbon cables NVIDIA has become fond of. Next is this shot of the front of the card, showing an X-frame that says RTX 4090, not Ti or Titan. Weirdly, it's also facing the opposite direction compared to the real 4090. This, combined with the text on the shroud that says GeForce RTX, rules out this specific example being a Titan. The previous Titan RTX didn't have GeForce branding, and you'd have to look back several generations to find both. All this said, there's a few options here. One is that this is still for an upcoming design, like maybe a 4090 Ti or whatever. Another option is that it's maybe intentionally misleading on the part of NVIDIA to have the 4090 marking without the Ti, but we're starting to get into like 4D chess scenarios that seem unlikely. It's also possible that this cooler was just scrapped. It was something that NVIDIA designed for the 4090, decided was not feasible for maybe cost or thermal reasons or mechanical reasons. Something like a PCIe riser, if not built into the PCB, would be a major reason to avoid this design, because NVIDIA definitely wouldn't put up with flaky PCIe risers on its GPU products. Regardless, we've seen enough leaks at this point that we're convinced NVIDIA was working on something. The first time this popped up, I remember skipping the story. We talked about it internally and we were like, there's just not enough yet. It looks like it might be fake. And so we skipped it. And as more and more of these photos have come out and you start looking at it, it seems like it was a real thing at one point. Very unorthodox mechanical design and pretty interesting, but we'll see if it goes anywhere further at this point. Up next, GPD and the Win 4. This is a handheld gaming device. GPD's Win series device has been around a long time. Earlier this year, they launched one with an AMD 6800U APU, but GPD has just announced a new, more powerful version coming out in August, which follows up the ROG Ally. So thanks to Valve basically pioneering a revival in this market, now with ASUS, GPD, and even Aya Neo, for example, re-entering the market with new designs, it's burgeoning at the moment. The update brings the 7840U and the 7640U APUs from AMD as options. The 7840U is basically the same thing as the Z1 Extreme that's in the ROG Ally, so the performance potential is at least as high as that, assuming sufficient cooling. Other optional specs on the Win 4 include up to 64 gigabytes of LPDDR5X, which is actually a thing, and that is a lot of memory for one of these. That runs at 7,500 megatransfers per second, and it's a ridiculous amount of RAM for a handheld. It's also available with up to 4 terabytes of PCIe Gen 4 storage. The overall shape and some design elements are reminiscent of the PlayStation Vita from the front, especially at the corners. The left side stick and D-pad placement is reversed though. The standout feature of the Win 4 is the slide-up screen that reveals a full hardware backlit keyboard underneath. We'd have to get one in hand to know how good it feels to use, but considering the dominance of BlackBerry devices or things like the Samsung Captivate Glide from years ago, it might be fine. Hardware keyboards used to be a thing everywhere. The front has a fingerprint reader below the D-pad and a small optical touchpad for use as a mouse. The closer handheld devices get to being just literally pocket computers, especially with Windows installed, the more you benefit from having a built-in way to control the mouse cursor. In addition to the touchpad, the Win 4 also has a joystick, simulated mouse mode, and the screen is touch-enabled. The screen itself is smaller than the Ally or the Steam Deck. It's 6 inches diagonally, and this one has a pixel density that is higher than either of those, due to its 1920 by 1080 resolution on the 6-inch display. Refresh rate is 60 Hz, so the Ally has a lead here, although there is a battery life trade-off. And while the whole device is smaller than either the Ally or the deck, it looks roughly on par with those devices for thickness, definitely thicker than the aforementioned Vita. GPD lists the dimensions as 92mm tall by 220mm wide, which is less than the deck, but despite the smaller size, it keeps a dual shoulder button trigger control scheme and at least one rear button. And as a final feature to point out on this, the GPD Win 4 has an Oculink on it. So this port offers a direct PCIe Gen 4x4 connection for a theoretical 63 gigabits per second of bandwidth, which is way more than Thunderbolt 3, and might make an external GPU actually viable for use without one of the weird ASUS proprietary things. And speaking of external GPUs, GPD has one of those available as well with a full range of I/O. We expect these are all going to be expensive because it's a high-end handheld, it has a lot of features, and GPD can't quite leverage the economies of scale advantages that a company like ASUS has to drive costs down further via volume. So we'll see what it's priced at the end of the day once it launches, but we are planning to review more and more of these handheld devices. They're really fun to work on, actually. The Steam Deck was interesting and different. We have the Ally in the works still, and now this will be on the list. Up next, the next NVIDIA GPU architecture likely isn't coming until 2025, and this isn't a leak or a rumor. It's kind of a weird mix. So this is an official NVIDIA slide that was shared with a closed group that has been leaked, and Hardware Lux is the one that got it. So Hardware Lux published this showing a members-only ML Commons quarterly training that NVIDIA participated in, where the slide shows a very big picture roadmap of NVIDIA's current and future architectures across multiple verticals. The consumer gaming parts are on the GPU row, represented by the current Ada Lovelace architecture in late 2022. Following the diagonal line leads to Ada Lovelace Next, a placeholder name for whatever gaming architecture is next.
Only gamers know that joke.
Hopper's already out in the data center market, so this may make like Volta and skip gaming. It looks to be positioned just after 2025 on the x-axis, indicating a Q1 launch. One way this could make sense is if NVIDIA leads with an ultra high-end Halo product that isn't going to do much volume, like a Titan, or maybe a workstation accelerator card. Now, 2025 seems pretty far away in GPU terms, but one thing that Hardware Lux noted is that this is a 30-month gap. So the gap between Ada Lovelace and Ampere, the 30 series, would be 30 months following this, and prior generations were more or less a 24-month timeline. So adding an extra 6 months in there, they're starting to stretch the time scale for new architecture. This could be for a few reasons, like trying to balance R&D costs with the increased level of effort it takes to gain meaningful performance each generation. 6 months is enough extra time for total development that would allow for a higher level of polish, maybe, or extraction of more money. It could also be the fact that as a company, it's now juggling more designs than ever before across GPUs, CPUs, and networking DPUs. And there may be some shared resources between them. The bottom line, though, is that if this is NVIDIA's new cadence, it lowers the amount of releases over a 10-year scale. Given that NVIDIA recently hit and sort of bounced off of a few times the $1 trillion market cap area, 10-year time scale cost savings is definitely the scale they're at this point, if not more. Also worth noting here, the data center market, according to these slides, will be addressed first. It'll get a Hopper Next GPU. Hopper, again, is already out and is a purely enterprise and data center focused solution. So Hopper Next will be early 2024. It's on a PCIe card, but there's no display out ports and it's only got 24 ROPs. Next one, EVGA is probably winding down. This is kind of something we've known. We indicated it a few times, but we share a little more on this one. So the story here came from EVGA's new Supernova XC series power supplies have launched. They are ATX 3.0 and PCIe 5.0 ready, and they're launching with only a 3-year warranty, which is noteworthy not because of necessarily the warranty in and of itself, but the duration is abnormal for EVGA. So Reddit user Logical Riot posted the observation to the hardware subreddit, sparking some interesting conversation. To lay the groundwork here, and prior to getting into it, the facts of the situation are that EVGA has been developing a new PSU line. It's using the XC. It's supposed to be using the FTW naming as well. We've known about these. I think we talked about them since about December, and that was when we visited to do our sort of final big documentary about EVGA's facilities as they were kind of winding down operations. So what I can tell you is there is an FTW power supply also. I don't think they've officially announced it. We were given permission in December to talk about it, but we couldn't show it. We couldn't really give any specs, and so we never did because there was nothing to talk about other than FTW power supplies exist. Now, the FTW power supply we saw was actually really cool. I hope it comes out because we liked a lot of the aspects of it. The fan in particular was built to be easily replaceable, which maybe relates to this story as well. And it's something we'd like to see them make. But that was supposed to ship in January, and then March, and then June. And we're past all those dates. Anyway, the XC power supplies are a step down from the FTW. That's not out. The XC ones are out, and they are 80 plus gold rated. They have 12 high power plugs natively, 850 and 1,000 watts for the options. And given those base specs, the EVGA warranties historically would be around 7 years on that type of product, but this one's 3, which lines up more with an 80 plus bronze power supply at the low end. So naturally, some of the commenters on Reddit were digging into this and indicated the low stock or availability of EVGA power supplies on its own website and on retailer websites, along with a lack of peripherals, motherboards, and things like that. And so here's where we can basically confirm at least some aspects of this. First of all, on our GN Extras channel last week, we published a video with the EVGA BIOS team and with Kingpin. That video on its own wouldn't have been enough to pull over here because it was just kind of a quick, here's what a BIOS engineer does. But the last question I asked in the video was, what's the next project?
There's no next project. Yeah. We won't be colleagues anymore. It's so sad.
Yeah.
So sad.
So EVGA's BIOS team, as we said, is departing, and they are going to to different motherboard manufacturers, ones that already exist. So EVGA is definitely getting out of motherboards from everything we can see. We've kind of known this for a while, but it wasn't 100% confirmed, and that more or less confirmed it at this point. Power supply is the last thing they have. And I said this in a Patreon video recently. There's a Patrons Ask GN that's just gone up where you can get kind of the full discussion. But to recap parts of it here because it's relevant, EVGA, there are some additional factors that we could not talk about and still cannot talk about. That it's nothing crazy. It's not hardware related. There were some personal factors for ownership that I'm not going to get into. But we've known about those since the original announcement of EVGA backing off. I think we even said that there were some personal factors, but basically left it the same way I am here. So the point is, because we know EVGA's owner doesn't want to sell, and because he has not put anyone else in charge or in place, there's really only one direction the company goes, which is to wind down. So this kind of tracks with that. It's sad. It's not 100% confirmed, but I think we're about as close to confirmation as we can get here. So that's it for the EVGA story. You can check out the GN Extras channel. There's a public video with the BIOS team. It's pretty interesting. And then there's the Patreon video where I kind of say the same stuff, just maybe an extra couple minutes of it. All right, next one. Intel is continuing its march forward with improvements for its ARC drivers. And these are interesting because there's some pretty big uplift in performance here. This is the new beta driver version 101.4514. And this brings support for 2 new games, as well as Assassin's Creed Unity updates. Strangely, Unity, a game from 2014, tops the list with up to 313% performance uplift at 1440p with high settings. Given the way percentage math works, that could just mean going from something like 15 to 47 or so FPS. So we'll assume this game basically was broken on ARC prior to the update. This seems like a random pulled from a hat game to optimize, and we wouldn't be surprised if, again, it was a result of a single dev who really wanted to be able to play Unity on ARC because it's in the game backlog. The other 2 games are more relevant. F1 2022 reportedly gets up to a 36% uplift at 1080p with high settings, or 10% on Ultra with ray tracing enabled. Rounding out the list is Deathloop, where Intel cites 10% at 1080p and 8% at 1440p. If you're interested in these specific improvements, you need to go to the main ARC driver page and choose the beta section. Intel also announced that Blender version 3.6 adds hardware acceleration for ARC graphics on the Embry renderer. This boosts ray tracing performance and drops render times. Absolute improvements vary on the scene and the shaders used, but Intel cites a range of 9% to 75% using public demo scenes. In order to enable this, you need to have the latest Blender version 3.6 and open System Preferences to enable Embry on the GPU under one API. Intel also recommends updating to the latest driver version for the best performance. This is what Intel needs. They keep pushing these drivers. Basically every week at this point we have an update where it's noteworthy, meaning like double-digit percentage increases in more than one game for Intel drivers, and now they're also adding some production level support. So the next thing we want to see is Premiere support to get quick sync working on something like an A380 in Adobe Premiere, which last we tried it wasn't. And that would be big. That would be a very good use case for Intel Arc cards as an accelerator, say with a CUDA card as well. So if they keep doing this as battle mage approaches for maybe 2024, then Intel might kind of have its driver act cleaned up. That's it for this one. There were some other small news updates for the week as well, but that's the major news. And we will continue working on our next big project, which is a documentary, full-length video. It's probably going to be around or over an hour long. And as always, thank you for watching. Subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersaccess.net to grab one of our items, like, say, the Amp Modmats that now have the pin and the extra cards included. And thanks for your support. We'll see you all next time.